Welcome back to the Content That Grows podcast. Today I'm excited to be joined by Justin Simon. Justin consults, advises, and executes content distribution and repurposing strategies for growing SaaS companies and founders. He is the host of the Distribution First podcast and creator of the Content Repurposing Roadmap. And I've had the chance to know Justin for, I don't know, maybe almost going on 2 years now. So excited to sit down and chat through some of the stuff today. So glad to have you with us today, Justin.
Awesome, Nate. Thanks for having me on. Definitely super exciting to chat and excited to get to it.
Yeah. So today we'll be chatting about, content distribution and repurposing. I think there's a lot of folks in the SaaS world, in the tech world, where you mentioned content distribution, content repurposing. Justin's quite likely the first person that comes to mind for them. So excited to have him to chat through some of the stuff. And Justin, I think really to start would just be helpful to kind of understand, like, what was like the moment or trigger for you that really made you kind of lean into a heavy emphasis on content distribution and content repurposing?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was when I changed jobs. I went from a company where I was running content and had a whole content team of probably close to 10 people just on the content team, and then moved to a high growth SaaS startup where we had a marketing team and I was marketer number 3. And so, our whole marketing team was a third of what my content team was. And just coming in, trying to get my feet set, trying to figure out how to run an effective content strategy with less people, less resource, how to do that, what are the best ways. And that's really through kind of sheer brute force, but also necessity, came in the idea of repurposing distribution and just saying, okay, I can't manage the current workload that you all were handling because it was insane. Let's cut back on some of that, but spread it out and figure out how, what's the ROI on these things. A lot of those things triggered back in my head even years ago, just in terms of man, we're creating a lot of content. What's the ROI, especially if it isn't ranking on Google? That was the way of measuring content success for years, was
right.
Keywords, impression, or not impressions, but sessions up and to the right growing over time. Yeah. And so when you come into a high growth startup, especially where SEO isn't maybe the play, or they're still trying to figure out what things they're trying to go after, how do you still do content successfully? And so that's where we really leaned on to things like social and email and building those things out.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's, one of the good things, having, especially on the consulting side, having worked with both funded companies and bootstrapped companies, is the bootstrapped companies tend to not lose that sense of scrappiness and, find a way, and, that bandwidth constraints sort of force some creativity and whatnot. And so, and that can certainly exist in funded companies too. But I think, I think that makes sense. That that's kind of where that came from for you, was sort of that shift in the staff and size, but wanting to have the big impact. So, what were some of the things you mentioned? Social, email, but what exactly what'd you start doing first to really kind of test it out and gain some traction?
Yeah, literally the first thing I did when I joined was I started looking at the sort of twofold new content that was being created, within the last month or so that I got there, because that was stuff that was top of mind for them, but then also looking back at the top performing content over, the last year or so. And so taking those two buckets and then literally just started repurposing that content for LinkedIn and pulling out the best pieces and trying to create native versions of that content. So if we had different things on different topics, rather than trying to just throw a link out there and get people to click, because they had already had a decent following on LinkedIn. And so we kind of knew that was where we were going to be at from the social side. and just figured out how to take that content and get it back out in front of that audience. Because again, like, it didn't take long to look through a GA, graph and figure out like, oh, nobody's hitting this content through search. You throw it into SEMrush or to HA. Oh, no, nobody's Googling these things. And so these are ideas we need to get out into the marketplace. And so that was literally the first thing I did. I opened up a Google Doc. Anybody who kind of follows what I have, I call them distribution docs, but they're so simple. But it's just like literally one screen has the blog content, another screen has a distribution doc set up, and I just started creating that content, going back and forth, and then working with our social manager to get that stuff scheduled out. And then from there, learning, seeing what's working, what's not, and then building it up from there.
Yep. Yeah, that's great. And it's you mentioned a couple of times that like there's not the organic traffic there, and you need to do something. But I think I think there's a lot of value in doing it, even if you do have a ton of organic traffic. And one is just the diversity of channels, and you're hitting people at a different context and different state, and ultimately, like, even if it is repurposing or copy and pasting, and 80% of it's the same from part of a blog post, like, it's still unique content, if you're tailoring it to the platforms. And so that's what we're always trying to tell clients and really everyone is like, organic search is a distribution channel. It's not like the thing, and then everything else is sort of like secondary. Like, it's a distribution channel, and you have a lot of opportunity to build in some of the other ones.
Yeah, I feel the same way, Nate. It's something that really dawned on me in the last couple of years too, is because for me, and maybe traditionally for a lot of content folks in B2B, SEO was the distribution channel. And then it was like, maybe we did some social media on the side, but it wasn't really like anything we were really driving, traffic to. Our traffic driver was really SEO and trying to do that. So I think that is a shift, and that was definitely a shift in my mind, and probably a shift in a lot of people's mind too, is, oh, it's just in the list of other distribution. It might be more effective for certain things, but it's just in the list of the other distribution channels. Yep,
absolutely. So, I think a lot of people at this point probably understand, and even if they're just hearing about it right now as we're talking about it, it's a fairly easy concept to grasp at a high level, like distributing your content, repurposing it, taking, pieces and reformulating it for other channels. But what would you say are some of like biggest mistakes that you see marketers make around the actual execution of this?
See both with prospects that I talk to, or just people that I work with, is trying, even if they're not necessarily trying to do all the channels, there's this temptation to want to do a bunch of distribution means 5 things or 10 things. And I think the biggest hang up there is, in order to do distribution well, you have to know the distribution channels that you're using well. Yeah. And it sounds like such a thing to say, but if you want to succeed at Twitter, you have to put in the work on Twitter to know what works, what doesn't, how, what your audience likes. It's a grind. It can be a huge undertaking to try to make those things work. Simply posting on any given channel, it isn't going to cut it anymore. And having it sounds ridiculous, but I know companies who have handed, literally today in 2023, handing social media off to an intern, or handing it off to, and it's like that's fine, but those are the results you're going to have. You're going to have intern quality results on social, when you could really build a system that takes advantage of those channels. And so, I think that's one of the biggest mistakes, is just understanding the channels and being focused and not trying to spread yourself too thin.
Yeah. I think it's great advice. How do you feel then about some of the tools that are like, upload this one video or upload one thing, and it like automatically repurposes, cuts it, and like posts it to like 10 or 15 different channels? Where does that sit for you?
I mean, for the posting part, I'd be terrified of if it was just blindly like grabbing content and throwing it. That sounds awful to me.
Yeah.
I'm getting more comfortable with using tools to get me 60 to 80% there.
Yep.
I think that's one of the things that companies are wanting to do and individuals are wanting to do is speed up the process of repurposing. And if you have something that's really good and solid, I have zero problems with that. That makes a ton of sense to be able to, chunk out the main ideas and those type of things. But I think we'll see, where this goes. But I still think at the end of the day, social media is social, and there is this sort of dynamic that makes it run. I mean, certainly a platform like LinkedIn in particular, which is a networking platform, you have to be active and engage and comment, and like there's an intrinsic value to being a participant in these channels. A little less so on something like YouTube or TikTok or something like that, but even so, you still need to know the nuance of the channel and understand what works and what doesn't. And if you're just posting and you're not actively every day in the weeds or have somebody who is, it's really hard to know what works. Like I was just working with a company and we were doing a 30-day kind of initial look at what's been working and what isn't on social. And just even within 30 days, you can start to figure out, oh, okay, this theme is really interesting to our audience. We posted about it half as much, but every time we did, the engagement was twice as high. So it's like, okay, that's a pretty good indicator. And again, it's maybe not perfection, but it's enough to say, okay, like next month, what happens if we double up our content on this particular theme that we were talking about?
Yeah. And I would agree that there's, I think that some of those tools are good for execution efficiency. But it, like you said, it sort of still comes down to like making sure you're good with what's going out on them, and then ultimately having a presence and engagement and everything else on those channels. So like, just because it can publish to 15 or 10 channels in one click doesn't mean that you should. But if you are prepared and staffed and capable of engaging there, and you know the nuances, then by all means. Yeah, I think that's great. Any other mistakes? I know you kind of mentioned the main one, but anything else that you see that you would want to note?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main mistakes are, I mean, one of them, honestly, like with repurposing that I see is people just don't do it. They know they should like distribute and repurpose their content. And I have heard it so many times. It'd be funny to hear if you've heard this too, but it's like, it feels like it's cheating, or it feels like it's, like cheating in a bad way. Not like, oh, I got this cheat code, but like, oh, it feels like I'm cheating on, the person next to me's desk on their paper. It's like, no, like you created this content. Hopefully it's really good. Like you're actually doing your audience a disservice by not getting that back out there in front of them. And another myth with that is like repurposing is just copy and paste, or it's super easy. Like repurposing and distributing your content does take effort, sometimes maybe just as much effort in some ways, depending on what you're doing. But what I have found is that by repurposing either the same content themes, even the same content, it takes away some of the mental strain to feel like you constantly have to be coming up with the new angle and the new ideas and the new things. And like that alone is enough to just like, I can take a breath and I can like prepare and understand. And honestly, when you know how to like, I always say like put on those X-ray vision goggles and see all the things that can come off those pieces of content, it's kind of exciting to say like, oh man, if we're able to create this one really awesome thing, we could get, a half a year's worth of really good things to keep that coming up over and over again.
Absolutely. Yep. No, I think I hadn't heard anyone refer to it as cheating, but I think some of the commentary that I've heard is definitely around like, isn't my audience going to notice if I'm, publishing the same thing repeatedly? And, I personally tested that a little bit, and in just like, 3-4 weeks apart, publishing this exact same post on LinkedIn. And then kind of looking through, and there was definitely, I don't remember what it was, but, a the overwhelming majority of like likes or comments on the posts were different people. And so maybe some of the people that engaged the first time saw it again. But like, I pretty much on LinkedIn every single day, and I don't know that I would really even notice, from your content or anything that you actually posted the exact same thing verbatim. Like there's just way too much out there. But the other thing that I mention sometimes is like, I don't personally, want to be like a touring keynote speaker or, like speaking at conferences all the time and stuff. But like people that do that, like they typically deliver the same talk at every conference for like a whole year. And that's part of why they're so dang good at it, is like that it's like, a play. Like they know their lines, they know their like where they're moving on stage and, all of that stuff. And, pause for laughter, all that. Like it's real. They have it down pat and they deliver it. And, the reality is that you may have people at multiple conferences that you're speaking at, and it's fine. They either attend it twice because they liked it a lot, or they'll see, oh, it looks like the one I already saw before, and they'll go somewhere else because you're often, at a conference trying to decide between multiple things anyway. So, I think there's a lot of examples to prove that like it's not cheating. It's not going to be, you're not going to get outed. Like someone's going to like call you out for that, So I think there's a ton of opportunity.
I've seen one person in the wild get called out, and it was so lame. It was so lame. Like I felt worse for the person who was like, you went on November 4th and you already posted this. Like what? And it was like, man, that is so like it is so, it's so much more on that person in the audience than it is on the person posting it. And I agree. I see the same thing, and I say the same thing a lot. Like consistency matters. Like there's a reason why, like you said at the beginning, like for good or bad, like there's a reason why my name probably comes up one of the top 2 or 3 people when you talk about content repurposing and distribution, because I talk about it all the time, and I talk about the different aspects of it. And, that is an opportunity for anybody and for any company to do the same thing. Like I can guarantee you, because I can I show you what I did. It was not rocket science. It was like consistency, staying on message, having something worth saying, like all those things over and over again. And because the other thing I think with that is people are scared that the audience will get bored, the audience will leave,
right?
They'll unsubscribe. And to be fair, that will happen, and that happens to me all the time. People unsubscribe from my email list every day. People probably unsubscribe or mute or hide me on socials every day. It would not surprise me at all. But that's okay, because those people are no longer interested in what I have to say. And for every one of those, hopefully there's 5, 10, 15, 20 more new ones that are coming on.
Yep. Yeah, I love that. So in your opinion, kind of shift gears a little bit, like what would you say is the biggest value proposition regarding companies like repurposing their content?
I think at the end of the day, like it's probably just a pure dollars and cents ROI, time and money for both. It is a really important thing. I think also, like, especially for companies who are doing those big quarterly or yearly pieces of content, to have a strategy to not just release it in April and then talk about it again next April, but to have a strategy that involves taking that piece of content and building on it and building it up throughout the year is super important, because I mean there's a lot of time, money, and effort that goes to sit on an archive.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah, it's a good way of putting it. I think there's I was going to try to make an analogy, but I'll stop trying to do that on the spot. I think that there's, for me, the real aha moment was a bit, again, of a bandwidth constraint. So we just, it was a couple, I don't know, maybe like 18 months ago or so, we were just at a point where we were just really like with our team size and client load, like we were pretty full. And so like we weren't really creating new content. And I think we maybe had 10 posts on our blog. It was very, very early. And I wanted to just keep coming up with things to share on LinkedIn and educate. And so I just kept kind of going back to some of those posts that I'd written or someone else, and would just kind of like read through, and you realize like, after doing that over and over and sort of being forced to go back to the well because, you're not creating anything new, that you start to realize how much life you can still get out of that post. That's not just like, resharing the entire post, but that one image works well. Do a single image post with some text, and then there's another one, and then you can do carousel, and you can do a roundup of the high level points, and you can go deep on another point, and like, not obviously not telling you anything you don't know, but for me, it was just, that's where it really kind of became like, wow, there's a ton here that otherwise just isn't getting seen, other than some of the organic traffic that we're getting. But, we're not a huge brand, and there's not people just choosing to come to our site to explore and stuff, So
yeah,
that for me was a really big realization. And then, from that, we also just saw like, continued growth of our profiles, and therefore, more interest in our services and leads and all that, entirely from content that had already been written, and we weren't creating any new blog content at the time, and just creating social content from it. So I do agree. I think there's just a ton of opportunity that any company can have. And especially when you come into a company that's got maybe 1,000 blog posts and a bunch of recorded webinars and ebooks and stuff, and you're like we could not create anything new for a really long time and just distribute, or just be ramping that up and doing both at the same time. If you have bandwidth, then just go that much faster. But so a lot of opportunity sitting in the archive, like you said.
yeah, and sometimes it's those things that are so like blatant that you should be doing more with that you're not. Like one client I was working with, they had a series where they were, it was multiple years old at that point, but people who had watched it converted at a significantly higher percentage than people who hadn't. So it was like, oh, okay, let's take all this really good information that is in this series that you have, and let's repurpose it and get it back out in front of the audience to where they don't have to just stumble upon it one day and be able to get it. And so being able to do stuff like that is really good, and being able to take those things. And again, it's funny how much you can get out of the things that are, the 10 blog posts that are sitting on your website or something like that, because like you said, your audience, unless you're showing up in Google and showing high in Google, your audience isn't going to be able to see it.
Yeah. I want to share this random, I guess, kind of story real quick, but it feels very related. Prior to Sprout, I worked for like a SEO digital agency, and I had this client that was a plastics company, and we were basically building a new website for them, and then like, some other stuff. And I was meeting with them basically like, how are we going to get all the content for all the product pages? Like, you have hundreds of products and whatever. And then they were very much like, there's no way we're going to write all of that, for the website. Like, we don't have that. We don't have all that content. And I don't remember how, but somehow through the conversation, we found out that they had a spec, they call it like a spec sheet or something like that for sales. And it was literally a 294 page PDF with one page for every product that had like the name, the specs, an image, like all the dimensions, colors, like all this stuff. And I was like, this is like, each one of these is like a web page, like it's all right here. You have all this content. But like to them, they didn't even like think of it that way. It was like, oh, we have to create new content for the website, And so I think that, like you're saying, people can just get so close to what they're doing and what they have that they can't really see that there is that opportunity to do that. So last question real quick on this topic, and then we'll kind of jump into the final four. So we talked a bit about like social media, and I think that's one that a lot of folks understand and probably default to, but any other distribution channels outside of social media that you think, like, for SaaS companies, that they just aren't using it enough, or like might not even realize that it's a good one for additional content distribution?
I think we'll talk about this maybe in the final four, but I in some way, shape, or form. But I think it's funny enough, I think email newsletters are having kind of a comeback, with the rise of, Substack and, all these different platforms to be able to do that, creator economy, all these things where you can get information, education, entertainment delivered directly into your inbox from whoever you want. I think it's underrated. I also think from a B2B perspective, it's probably underrated and how you should actually provide value within that channel, and not just be a constant drip of product information, or here's our blog roundup, or stuff like that, but actually providing something unique and interesting, and helping your audience every single week, and giving them some incentive to be able to actually want to sign up, versus, hey, sign up for our newsletter. We promise we'll, like, wink, wink, nudge. We promise we'll give you good value if you give us your email. And so I think that it's underrated, because I think if you can actually do that in a way that is useful and beneficial, it kind of can start to tear down some of the walls that have been left behind from, like, gating content and things like that. So if you're just providing value and getting people who are super interested in what you have to offer and what you're interested in, building that list is a better way to do that, versus like a little bit of the more historical bait and switchy type email list building.
Yeah. I think that's great. And I would agree that there's definitely an increase in that, podcasts too, like podcasts were a thing, and then very out of style for many years. And then I think came back. And so, yeah, I do feel like that's just the market dynamic shift in people wanting to have sort of their own platform of podcast or newsletter, or both, that allow them to kind of communicate that, and then it's just very valuable for people. So, and I think you just to real quick dig in on that a little bit more, though. I think I would love to have you maybe expand on. So you mentioned, like, it's not just a place to, like, just dump a bunch of links to your other content or something like that. And so to maybe kind of lead it, and then you can refine what I'm saying or add to it. But what you were saying before is the key is, like, it's not, what are we going to come up with? What are we going to write in the newsletter? It's all the other content we're already creating, whether that's blog content or social content or something else, seeing where there's value, what's resonating, and then taking that as a starting point, but then tailoring it, to, like, writing it to fit the channel and be an effective newsletter. But it's not starting from square one, figuring out what the heck you're going to write about. You already kind of know what's working, and kind of building from that. So is that a fair assessment of what you would do there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you're going to do a newsletter, social, any distribution channel, I mean, it's the name of my podcast, like you mentioned. It's the sort of the framework that I use to build all this stuff out is distribution first. It's a distribution first framework where you essentially reverse engineer everything off of distribution. And so by knowing you want to have an email newsletter as a core part of your distribution, when you go to record your podcast or write your blog post or do whatever that thing is, newsletters should be a default part of your planning process, because it's part of your distribution strategy. And so for me, like, when I outline a podcast episode, I'm already thinking ahead as I'm outlining. I haven't hit record yet. I'm already thinking about what section in here or what's interesting in here that could go into the newsletter. And so I'm trying to like think that far ahead. So then after I've recorded or after I have the guest, and even if it pivots, I can have an idea to say, oh yeah, I wanted to talk about this. These are those three things we wanted to touch on. I can almost have the outline for the newsletter written out of the outline that comes out of the podcast. And so that's like where the next level of like repurposing and distribution for me comes in. Is it's not an ad hoc sort of like, oh, let's look back. It's a proactive looking forward as well.
Yep. That's great. Awesome. So let's shift real quick into the final four. Same questions we ask every guest that comes on. First one being, what's a recent success or learning you'd like to share?
Yeah, I think we touched on a little bit, but for me, it's that idea of being able to create platform native content. It means you have to be knowledgeable on the platform. So if somebody's coming to you and saying, hey, we need to explore XYZ channel, that's fine to do that, but make sure you're actually going to be able to put in the time and effort or hire somebody to put the time and effort in to be able to know that. Just having a social media person, I think, is going to maybe shift and evolve over the next few years, because having somebody do YouTube is completely different than Twitter, which is completely different than LinkedIn. So I think there's just more nuance in that and in knowing those channels.
Yep. For your company, what role does content play in the overall strategy?
Yeah, for me, it is the entire strategy. It's literally my entire marketing engine. And again, for me, I'm doing consulting, I'm doing advising and some execution. So I don't need a giant arsenal of clients that I'm working with at any given time. But for me, it really does drive interest. It drives engagement, like building the podcast, writing the newsletter, being on LinkedIn every day. Those things really do drive interest in me. I'm sure you see the same thing, like you had mentioned for 10 Speed. And so it's funny because moving away from working at a company and in a company, I can see all the things that are working that aren't easily measurable, like that DM from somebody who said, listen to the show, let's have a conversation, or, just these different things that come up that aren't tracked in a dashboard necessarily. And so I think being able to see those things run effectively for my company has been honestly key to then help the companies that I'm working with as well, and see, okay, let's re-add those back into these clients and their companies and be able to help them see the same growth and be able to understand the mindset that can help them get there.
Yep. How does your company define success for you and your team, which is you?
Which is me, yes.
Yeah. How you can answer it your way, or if there's some clients you want to kind of talk how they measure and define success.
It's different. It's different depending on the client, because honestly, for some people, it's like success equals getting a consistent system that they can execute on and not stress out.
Right.
That is success for some of them. Others are more advanced, and they want a system that is going to be able to get them in front of their audience, get more out of the content they're doing, be able to show kind of like that repurposing multiplier to be able to see if we didn't repurpose this content, we are getting X. Now that we've repurposed it, we're seeing Y, and being able to track all those things. So just getting more, whether that's impressions, views, watch time, all that stuff, more bang for the content buck out of what they're creating. And some people, it's, hey, at the end of the day, right? Like, can we pay the bills? Are we making more money? Are we getting more clients? Are we getting more leads? Is this working?
Yep.
Is this not? At the end of the day, that's what it's going to come down to.
Yep. All right. And last one, what's your least favorite marketing conversation happening on social channels right now, and why?
I thought about it, and it was going to... I should just say AI, because it's everywhere. And I'm like, if I have to hear another AI conversation, I'm going to go crazy. Just because it feels like everybody it's just one of those things that caught on and is catching on and is trendy, and so everybody wants to talk about it. I will say that I think in general, anytime anybody says anything's dead, I kind of cringe a little bit,
Sure.
because for the most part, things don't die. The classic Mark Twain quote, history doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. I love that because I think it's so true. Like a lot of like email, like we talked about, was a great example. Podcasts, like these things that sort of they rise up, they fade away, and then they rise up again, or it rises up on a different platform, or these things just are cyclical, and history does tend to rhyme with itself. And so for me, I would say that my least favorite marketing conversation right now is AI and how all the things that's going to happen. I think there's a lot of pontificating on what could happen, and to be honest, we just don't know. And so I think like freaking out or worrying about it at this point is more stressful than it probably needs to be.
Yep. I'm with you. Cool. This has been awesome. Before we kind of wrap up, anything else, on the topic of content distribution, content repurposing that we didn't cover that you'd like to speak to?
I would just say start small and start doing it. Like, it's not difficult. It's not hard. Pick a channel that you want to start repurposing on. Pick a couple themes. Go look at your top content. Figure out what you want to be able to repurpose that into some different formats, and just start. And I think, to your point, like when you're forced to start and you're forced to figure out how to do some of those things, for me, one of the things I did when I was at TechSmith was we took a 10-week sprint where we didn't create anything new as a team, and we said we're only going to take our stuff and we're going to update our old blog posts. We're going to do repurpose some of the other things. And it was amazing to see the progress we made, because we, did things like added CTAs to our blogs and updated content, improved the rankings, worked with social to understand what what our top content even was. Like all of those things that can make really big impacts. And so I would just say, don't be afraid to start small and look at what's working now and just try to do more of that.
Yep. Love that. All right. And then you have your podcast, your course, and then obviously social channels. Can you just quickly tell everyone kind of where to find you and some of your stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. So my main channel is LinkedIn. I'm there every day. You can find me if you search Justin Simon. I'm sure I'll show up. The podcast is Distribution First. And I do have a course all on content repurposing. It's called Content Repurposing Roadmap. You can find that. And then if anybody's interested in working with me, my website is justinsimon.co. But yeah, that's the rundown. You can come hang out or listen to the podcast, and I'm happy to jam on this stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. And for anything else for 10Speed, visit 10speed.io/podcast. You can find all previous episodes there. And be sure to like and subscribe. So that, we'll go ahead and wrap up. Thanks so much, Justin, for coming on and chatting about this today.
Awesome. Thanks, Nate.